Number 1. Sleeping in. I was home in bed, sleeping in since it was the weekend. At the time, I was 14 years old, and it was during the spring. At first, I really didn't know what had woken me up. Normally, I'm one of those people who sleeps like a rock throughout the entire night or morning, and I really wasn't ready to get up. It was then, a few moments later, when I noticed it was pretty dark in the room. The shade on my window was pulled down, as it normally always happened to be. But even that did not normally block off as much light to have made it dark in the room. Looking over at my alarm clock, I noticed that it was about 11 a.m. I was about to get up and open the shade on the window. However, before I could, there was a huge flash of light outside of the house, and I heard the thunder crack immediately afterward. I got up, walked over to the window, and opened the covering. It was storming really violently outside. I mean, this was a vicious storm, with dark black and green clouds. The rain pouring so the storm gutters were just pouring out water. And the wind, that was something too. The wind had to be around 22 miles an hour. Normally, I sleep through a storm, but this wasn't that surprising that it had woken me up. I mean, this was a very loud storm. Anyway, I had been up really late into the morning, and I felt like I should go back to bed. Right when I got back to the bed, I heard my family downstairs. Both of my parents and my brother and sister were all morning people. They had all likely been up for a very long time. I didn't care. I wanted to go back to sleep. Storms help with sleep most of the time, because they make me not want to get out of bed. And yeah, I did fall back asleep right away. And there was another noise, and it woke me up about an hour after I laid back down. The storm was still going on outside. I could hear it, and I figured it must have woken me up again. So even though it was about noon, I decided to lay back down. Before I could drift back off to sleep, I heard a knock on the door. I figured it was probably just one of my parents trying to get me up so I could come out for lunch. However, I had been up very late, and I just called out that I was going back to sleep for a while, and I'd be down later. Whichever parent it was, I could hear them walking away from the door. I then fell back to sleep, almost immediately. The third time I woke up, it was because someone shook me awake. It took me a moment, but it was my younger brother. He was 12. "Get up, Kyle," he told me. "It's an emergency. Dad wants us all to be downstairs." Groggy, I got up and went with my little brother. When we went down into the living room, I was startled by what I saw. So much stuff was missing. Our TV, our stereo, lamps, furniture, paintings. And before I could put two and two together, my parents told me that we had been robbed, and asked if I had heard anything. When I asked them what they were talking about, they told me something that chilled me to the bone. My family had just gotten home from shopping. They had left around 9 a.m., so they weren't home all day. That meant that the noises I heard coming from the living room were not caused by my family. That also meant that it was one of the robbers who had knocked on my door around noon. From 9 a.m. to about 1 p.m., people were in my home while I was sleeping. Well, that definitely scared me. I wasn't sure how to react and just had to be thankful that the robbers weren't trying to kill me or something. And this story has somewhat of a good ending. Those two guys that robbed us had robbed several other houses too, and were caught 2 days later. I mean, that didn't really help me sleep, but it didn't hurt my sleep either. Number 2. Motel. I had a really awful experience one time when I was traveling across the country. I don't like flying, so I was driving. It took longer, and therefore I needed to sleep in motels, but it was worth it to keep from having to fly. About 2 days into my trip, I began seeing thunderclouds and lightning off in the distance. and I do hate driving in storms, so I hoped that when I got to the storm, it would be a short one, and I wouldn't have to pull over. It didn't work out that way, though. In fact, when the storm hit me, it was very heavy. My windshield wipers were not doing a good job of keeping up with it, and it had gotten so dark out. After a while, I realized that I would have to stop at the next motel and get a room. I found a place and I got my room key. On my way out of the lobby, I noticed someone was outside in the rain. He was in the building that was facing mine, since the motel was U-shaped. I only noticed him because he was out standing in the rain, and I had no idea why anyone would want to do that. After a moment, I realized that I had been staring at the guy for too long. He noticed it and gave me a really dirty look. I looked away from him immediately and just went over to my room. When I locked the door behind me, I then went over to the window and I opened the curtain and looked out. And the guy was still over there, standing, pacing back and forth right in the rain. Once again, I looked at the man too long, and he must have felt my eyes on him, or noticed me, because he quit pacing and looked directly at me. Our eyes actually locked that time for a few moments. He looked really upset. He then took one step in my direction, and when he did, I closed the curtain really quickly. I looked over at my door and realized that I hadn't locked it. I was worried that I must have pissed the man off for staring all that time. I moved over to the door and locked the bolt. There happened to be a little window in the door, and I looked out it, half expecting to see him right next to my door, but instead, he was in the parking lot, looking in my direction, but he didn't come any closer. After watching him for another moment, I figured it must not have really been as big a problem as I had thought it was. I closed the curtain and then began getting comfortable so I could turn on the news to see how long I would be stuck in the motel. The storm continued for a long time. It was really nasty and loud. I just lay in bed and watched TV. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but I must have dozed off when I was watching the TV. When I woke up, I was very confused right away, and the TV was off, and the lights in the room were off too. I looked over at the clock and noticed that it was off too. When I got my bearings about me, I assumed there must have been a blackout. Getting up, I moved over to the window so I could see if the power was out all over the motel. I noticed it was. I thought then that maybe I could go over to the office of the motel and find out how long it had been out, what time it was, and if anything was being done to get the power back. I talked to the desk clerk and found out it was 1 in the morning. After that, I headed back to my room. As I got to my door, I noticed something very odd. The door wasn't latched. I approached it and tried to remember if I had left it that way. I really had no idea. I figured I must have, though. However, when I had gotten just a few feet away from the motel room, there was a crack of lightning that brightened up the entire area, and for the split second it was there, I noticed a face peeking out of the curtain and looking right at me, and he noticed that I had noticed him. After the revelation, the area went dark again, but the guy was opening the door, and I noticed it was the man I had been looking at. Acting purely on instinct, I turned and hustled back to the office. I didn't know if he was following me or what, but I immediately locked the office door. When the clerk asked what I was doing, I explained it to him, and he called the cops. I watched out the window, and I did see the man. He had followed me, but when I got inside, he went to his car. He got in and drove off, and another 2 flashes of lightning got me the license plate number. The man was arrested, and then it was explained to me what had happened. He had robbed a liquor store and was staying at the motel, also because of the rain. My staring at him made him paranoid, that he thought I may have known who he was, and that is why he kept giving me an angry look. He had killed the clerk at the store that he went to, and he had a gun on him. So if it hadn't been for that flash of lightning, I might have been his next victim. Number 3. Wind. I guess this wasn't really much of a thunderstorm and more like a windstorm. At least that's how it turned out. It really didn't rain at all. But for a couple of hours in the middle of the night, there was a lot of thunder and lightning. That calmed down at about 1 in the morning, but the wind then immediately picked up. It began howling through the entire night. I was in my house alone, and this kind of weather is what I really like anyway, so I wasn't really concerned about anything until the electricity went out. Or even then, I wasn't really concerned because I was alright, just sitting in my chair, looking out the window. I just loved the sound of howling wind. But that was not the only thing that I enjoyed about the windstorm. I mean, it was ferocious. At one point I saw a metal garbage can being blown by the wind across the entire road. And then I realized how absolutely powerful the wind could be. Well, now keep in mind, when the power went out, it went out on the entire street. There were no street lights or anything. Also, being so early in the morning, I doubted most people were awake. The reason I bring that up is when I had been sitting there for quite a while, I noticed something moving in my front yard. First, I just supposed it was some sort of debris being blown around, but then I noticed it was a person. So I then thought it might have been someone working for the electric company. But a closer look, even though it was very dark, revealed that it definitely was not. The person was hard to see because of the lack of light, but there was nothing indicating it could have been a worker. The guy was doing something. I couldn't tell what it was. But even though he was in my yard, he was right by the sidewalk. So I assumed I would give him the benefit of the doubt, and that he wasn't up to anything. He paced back and forth for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then finally he walked away. I had thought it was weird, but I didn't let it bother me after that. Really, I felt like I could watch the wind forever. It was entertaining, but I did think it was weird when I saw who I assumed was the guy from before, back in front of my house again. He walked back to the area he had been in before. He got down on his hands and began looking on the sidewalk and the grass, as if he had dropped something, and was trying to find it. Again, I found this very weird, but there was really not anything wrong with what he was doing. Yeah, it was all very weird. He left again after a few moments. I really began to get very curious as to what he was doing out there. I leaned forward a bit and began to wonder if he would come back again. It didn't take very long until the man did indeed come back. And yet again, he began doing something on the ground, but I just couldn't make out what it was. I really considered going out there and asking him what he was up to, but that thought did not last very long, however. I decided to just sit there and watch what was going on, rather than announce my presence in any way. I did not know how long I was there watching the man, before he finally left again. About an hour passed, and he didn't come back. My curiosity only grew during that time, and I wondered if I would have to go out there and take a look. I wanted to know whatever it was that man was doing. I was nervous as I went outside. It was still nearly pitch black, and it was still very windy, and I kept thinking that maybe he would come back while I was out there. I walked out to the area by the sidewalk. I noticed that right off the sidewalk into my yard was a small little mound. He had buried something in my yard. Wary that he might come back at any moment, I decided to find out what he had buried. It didn't take me long to dig it up, because the hole was very shallow. But when I finally felt something in the dirt, I was able to pull it out. It took me a few seconds to realize what it was, but when I did, I dropped it on the ground. It was a decapitated bat. I freaked out immediately and ran back to my house, locked the door, and washed the hell out of my hands. After calming down a bit, I did go out and look out the window, just in time to see that the man had come back again and was doing something, but was quickly gone. I didn't see him again, but when I woke up in the morning, I was stunned to see that the bat was duct taped to my front door. You know, I don't really want to know what was happening with that guy. It was a weird night, and nothing in the world could explain his weird actions to me. It was just creepy all around. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. Sorry I've been away for a little bit. I'm going to let you know that I'm going to post a few older videos right after this. I had taken them down back last year when I was worried about that whole duplication thing that was going on. So I wanted to put them back up, so over the next few hours I'll be doing that. And if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the picture of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and please share it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have a story you like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.